How's it going? Now I'm sure most of us have seen a movie or a show depicting soldiers of the British Army throughout the First World War. In those films, we saw the horrific conditions that they would come to endure throughout the duration of said war. However, most of us don't talk about the training that they received, as well as what they typically carried on their persons beside their rifle. So I hope to explore some of that in this video. And now I've found some very interesting archives from the time, such as letters they wrote from training camps, as well as when they first arrived in Europe. And a link for those will be in the description if you want to read for yourself. Joining the British Army. Now, this is going to vary greatly from the time the war began to the end of the war, as the romantic idea of war quickly faded to the reality that it is. Beginning of the war, they had over 250,000 regulars, combined with 250,000 territorial troops and 200,000 reservists. So an initial call for 100,000 volunteers was ran. That call was then met with over 500,000 volunteers. Now, of course, some of these didn't meet the medical requirements required, or even were underage. Even that didn't stop some of them, as they just lied about their age to the recruiter, or they just didn't show a birth certificate. Now, in the early days of the war, we saw the rise of PAL battalions, and essentially a town would form a battalion from its military-age men. This is a great concept in theory, as it allowed friends and co-workers to go together with camaraderie, but it had some great downfalls. For at the Battle of the Somme in July 1916, most of these PAL battalions were decimated, and then entire towns would get a notice the same day that most of its military-age men were then killed in action. So as a direct result, after that battle, PAL battalions were no more. Now, if you're not the most patriotic person, or you had a decent sense of what war really was and it's not at all what it's made out to seem, you might have been very hesitant to sign up. Have no fear though, the Earl Derby had a solution for you. For in the autumn of 1915, we saw the rise of the Derby scheme. This was essentially when canvassers, or people that would persuade others to support something, would visit the houses of those that have not enlisted yet. They would then use questionable tactics, such as harsh words or even just straight up threats to convince them to join. And if you avoided joining after all that, you most likely would have been facing conscription starting in January of 1916 to meet the requirements of the war. Now on to training. Training is something I find very interesting in regards to the First World War, and that is due to it varying greatly on when and where you enlisted, as well as the duration of the war saw training very quickly change its need. One of the great factors to how much training you would receive is how old you were. If you weren't quite 19, you would have additional training after basic training, so you come of age to go to frontline service. Now, basic training itself would typically be around 3 months, and as the war progressed, training would be shortened to meet man shortages as required, as well as the curriculum for the basic infantrymen would be adjusted to meet the vastly new type of warfare that we saw in the First World War. Now, while at basic training, your day would start from 0530 to 0630, and you would go until 1600 to 1700. Your day would consist of military discipline, drill, how to properly utilize your rifle and use a bayonet. You can't train properly without adequate gear, and that is an issue that was found in the Great War across all nations. For initial gear issues were often very delayed, and troops would be given basic wooden rifles to drill with. Uniforms also were delayed, or they were even given temporary ones until they could be given a regular uniform. And even then, theft was common due to supply issues. If you weren't lucky enough to be given a rifle, or even clothing, you probably weren't lucky enough to get any form of barracks, at least with a solid roof over your head. So you'd be living in a tent city with all your mates. Here we have a picture of the Leeds PALs at their training camp. Now I'm going to link some of the interesting historical documents that I found that describe first-hand accounts of the conditions that they had at these camps. Some of these even describe some of the meals you could look forward to, like porridge and bacon, meat, vegetables and sweets, and bread and butter and jam with tea time. Now every infantryman has a kit, and like recruiting and training, the kit was modified heavily throughout the war. Oftentimes this was due to supply issues. We're going to go ahead and talk about one that would have been utilized around the Battle of the Somme. For starters, it would have weighed almost 70 pounds, and that is because the British troops had some of the best equipment around. The uniform would have been the 1902 service dress tunic and trousers made of a wool in a dashing khaki color that offered better camouflage than most of the nations at the beginning of the war due to its drab colors. On top of your service uniform, you would have had either the 1908 pattern webbing, or due to increasing supply issues, the 1914 pattern leather equipment. Both would have room for 150 rounds of 303 British for your service rifle, the SMLE, or the short magazine Lee Enfield rifle. Close to that, you would have had equipment to service your firearm as well. Every troop also would have had dog tags, additional uniform or uniform items, clothing, personal hygiene items, wire cutters and entrenching tools for the maintenance of trench warfare. Food and personal items would have also made up their general kit. That's going to go ahead and wrap up my first of several videos on the armies of the First World War, particularly how recruiting for them came about, the typical gear they carried, and the training they received. As always, if you have any feedback for my videos, I would greatly appreciate it. I try my best to find ways to improve with every upload, and feedback is important to that. With that said, if you like this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'll catch you on the next one.